spirit speaking, truth seeking, heart reaching, knowledge leaking, seeds sowing, harvest reaping, man of meager means. I have yet to leave, I'm still breathing. To quit, I have no reason. I mean, I'm asleep, but I be trying to live my dream. I cannot even act if it's all easy. Either you gon' do it or you don't. Really, it ain't no in between. Baby, you can ask the sun. It's an everyday thing. Consistency in your routine is how you bring reality. Working like a slave, that's how I made this masterpiece. Living like a god, I lay at night, I rest in peace. They remember me, but I am not Haram
Peace, 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 peace. How you doing out there, light seekers? Man, I love that intro song. I'm sure you guys can hear it. Hopefully you can hear it as it comes in here. It's just so awesome to hear that every single time. It gets me excited. Knowing the guy who actually produced the single just makes it more enjoyable. So it's so amazing every time I get to hear that. But peace, peace, peace. As I said earlier, peace, peace, peace to everybody that's here. My name is Noble Barclay Bay. I'm here on behalf of the Burning Bush Tabernacle Science Temple and School. I'm here today just to do a quick reading. For everybody here today on a subject I think we've heard about before. We've maybe heard or seen the phrase before. I learned that there may be a new pronunciation for the phrase, which I always find that's really, really interesting. Anytime you can learn new things that you didn't know before. And so I think that's just what the joy of reading and learning is really all about. So before we get started, I'm going to say a prayer real quickly, and then I'm going to get into it. I'm going to probably do the preface and maybe parts of the first chapter of this particular book. I'll put it up on the screen so you can see it as well. Again, we're grateful for all those that have come here. You can always check us out multiple times throughout the week, but we do book club readings on Friday nights. We do adept studies with our Sheik, our map, our guide, Kari, Ibna, Goodman Bay. And then we have Sunday school, and then we're working out multiple times throughout the week. Again, as Sheik already talked about, the mind, body, and the spirit must agree. It must all come together. And so we try to just be an example. Being a Moor is not about filing paperwork and running out there and trying to prove to everyone that you're more intelligent than they are. It's not really what, being a Moor is not really what the science is really designed for. So I'm grateful that the BBT has opened their arms to me and allowed me to be a part of what goes on here. So without further ado, because I've been running my mouth for a minute, Allah, Father of the universe, Father of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. Allah is my protector, my guide, and my salvation by night and by day through his holy prophet, Noble Drew Ali, Shalom Aleichem, Ayash Ayah, Hotep, Islam, peace, 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 peace. Again, thank you here on this Friday, April 11th of 2025. You got to love life. You got to love how just the amazing opportunity we get every day to wake up and be an example. If not to ourselves, to someone else, whether you have a significant other, whether you have a little person, maybe they're a big person now, they used to be a little person. There's an opportunity every day for us to come out here and really be better than we were before. I think sometimes the difficulty that we have life is in holding yourself accountable, right? And here at the BBT, we have three pillars of who we are. It's consistency, communication, and making a commitment. You got to make a commitment to something, whether it's relationships, with the car you drive, whatever it is. You got to make a commitment to something. And then once you make a commitment to something, you got to be able to communicate, what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, if not to yourself, but to others, so that they can be a part of that or support that. And then most importantly, you've got to have some level of consistency. Like, you can't do anything in life without you didn't become the kind of driver that you are right now without being consistent. You didn't become the person you are that's been able to develop the knowledge, the skills, or whatever those habits that you have without some level of consistency. And so that's an important part of what we're going to do here. So again, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here really quickly. Hope everyone can see this right here. Again, this book is called The Great Ratio, the story of, and I would always pronounce that PHI, at least how I've always heard it growing up, as pie, right? Maybe it was phi, but I'm sure it was like pie, like pies that you eat. But if you look at the opening right here at the top, Livio unveils the history, and Livio is actually the author, of this particular literature. Livio unveils the history and mystery of the remarkable number. And again, I would always say pi, but then you look at it as pronounced Fee. So I would say, looking at that pronunciation, if that is correct, that's got to be fee. Maybe it's fey, right? But I'm just saying this based off my basic understanding of language. Certainly, there may be others who are a bit more advanced than I am. But certainly, as I look at that, that sounds like fee. So I would say that maybe the remarkable number phi, which certainly sounds different because I've heard it saying phi all my life, in such a way that math buffs and math phobes alike can celebrate her wonder. You will never again look at a pyramid, pine cone, or Picasso in the same light. And this is from Dan Brown, who is the author of the Da Vinci Code, which may or may not be a book I think that other people have heard of. I know there's a movie, and I don't know how close the movie is to the book. I do like to watch movies or adaptations of books sometimes. So again, The Golden Ratio of Pi by Mario Livio. Sorry. So I'm going to move here straight into the preface. Hopefully you guys can see that. If this is something you can't see, I certainly can try to make it a little bit bigger, because that may help. And so The Golden Ratio is a book about one number, a very special number. You will encounter this number, 1.61803 ... in lectures on art, history, and it appears in lists of quote-unquote favorite numbers compiled by mathematicians. Equally striking is the fact that this number has been a subject of numerous experiments in psychology. And again, this is just in this first paragraph talking about how mathematics and psychology, and history come together in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's the beautiful thing about knowledge, is if we can begin to try to see the knowledge for something that is much more expansive and has a much more connected tissue to everything. It's not always so I can't think of the word that I'm thinking of. It's not always so narrow in its scope, such that it doesn't have an impact with other things in life. So again, I became interested in the known number as the gold ratio 15 years ago, as I was preparing a lecture on aesthetics and physics. Yes, that is not an oxymoron. Again, now we've already talked about what? History, art, mathematics, psychology. Now we're talking about physics. Again, everything is connected. Many more colleagues, friends. Let me go back to the beginning. I became interested in the number known as the golden ratio 15 years ago, as I was preparing a lecture on aesthetics and physics. Yes, that is not an oxymoron. And I haven't been able to get it out of my head since then. Many more colleagues, friends, and students than I would be able to mention from a multitude of disciplines have contributed directly and indirectly to this book. Here, I would like to extend a special thanks to Ives Elaine Boyce, Mitch Figgenbaum, Hillel Gouchman, Ted Hill, Ron Lifshitz, Roger Penrose, Joanna Posma, Paul Steinhardt, Pat Thine, Theo or Tio or Teal, Anne Vanderhelm, Devakar Viswanath, and Stephen Wolfram for invaluable information and extremely helpful discussion. Again, my apologies to anybody if I'm messing up any of these names. I'm doing the best I can to try to be respectful of the correct pronunciation. I'm grateful to my colleagues, Daniela Calzetti, Stefano Castrotano, and Massimo Stavelli for their help with translations from Latin and Italian, to Klaus Litherer and Hermine Lant for help with translations from German, and to Patrick Godin for his help from translations from French. Sarah Stevens, Rayborn, English, Elizabeth Fraser, and Nancy Hanks providing me with valuable bibliographical and linguistic support. I am particularly grateful to Sharon Tulin for her assistance with the preparation of the manuscript. My sincere gratitude goes to my agent, Susan Rabiner for her relentless encouragement before and during the writing of this book. I am deeply indebted to my editor and Doubleday Broadway, Gerald Howard, for his careful reading of the manuscript and insightful comments. I'm also grateful to Rebecca Holland, publishing manager and Doubleday Broadway, for her unflagging assistance during the production of this book. Finally, it is only due to the continuous inspiration and patient support provided by Sophie Livio that this book got written at all. And I think it's important, when you read these acknowledgments, and I think I've said this before, and forgive me if I'm repeating something that you've already heard before. When you see how many people that are a part of this process, right? We think, oh, a person wrote a book, but look how many people they're thanking for all the support, the ways they were a part of making this project happen. And I think that's something that I would just say in life. I wonder if we have the full scope of that or understanding of that. I think in life, and I'm being general with these statements, and I think in life sometimes we get a bit selfish and we want things to happen, but only if it works in a way that we want to. But I think sometimes when I'm reading these things, it's just like, these are people that are signing on to be a part of something. They're seeing a vision that's bigger than themselves, and they're saying, hey, I could play a small part. I don't have to be the head. I don't have to be the this. I just got to be a part. And I think that's a beautiful thing every time I get to see it. So, again, I won't go through all of these chapters. Certainly I will leave this, to you folks, to kind of do, but I do want to at least try to get through some of this first chapter if I can do so. And so the first chapter here, Prelude to a Number. Numberless are the world's wonders. And that's Sophocles, 495 to 405 BC. The famous British physicist Lord Kelvin, William Thomson, 1824 to 1907, after whom the degrees in the absolute temperature scale are named, once said in lecture, when you cannot express it in numbers, your knowledge is of a meager and unsatisfactory kind. Interesting. Let me go back to that. When you cannot express it in numbers, your knowledge is of a meager and unsatisfactory kind. So that certainly seems to suggest that numbers are a part of everything. And I think in a lot of sense, if we think about it, we could realize how important, numbers are a part of everything, whether it's from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7. Every number has its place, in life. And so I think we don't spend enough time really, I think, understanding the value of numbers. Kelvin was referring, of course, to the knowledge required for the advancement of science. But numbers and mathematics have the curious propensity of contributing even to the understanding of things that are, or at least appear to be, extremely remote from science. In Edgar Allan Poe, The Mystery of Mary Roget, the famous detective Auguste Dupin says, "We make chance a matter of absolute calculation. We subject the unlooked for and unimagined to the mathematical formula of the schools. At even a simpler level, consider the following problem you may have encountered when preparing for a party. You have a chocolate bar composed of 12 pieces. How many snaps will be required to separate all the pieces? The actual answer is much simpler than you might have thought, and it does not require almost any calculation. Every time you make a snap, you have one more piece than you had before. Therefore, if you need to end up with 12 pieces, you will have to snap 11 times. And I hope you guys can picture that, a little, a chocolate bar, that's got all the little rivets in it. I think that's what they're talking about. It's 4 across, 4 in the middle, and then 4 on the bottom. We're talking about the Hershey's bar, basically, is what they're talking about. Every time you break off a piece of that, that's how you get to the 12 pieces. Again, but you'd have to do that 11 times for you to get 12 pieces, if that makes sense. More generally, irrespective of the number of pieces the chocolate bar is composed of, the number of slaps is always one less than the number of pieces you need. Interesting. So again, the number of snaps is always one less than the number of pieces you need. Interesting. Even if you are not a chocolate lover, you realize that this example demonstrates the simple mathematical rule that can be applied to many other circumstances. But in addition to mathematical properties, formula, and rules, many of which we forget anyhow, because I know I forgot a lot of this stuff that I learned back when I was younger. You kind of have to continue to read and search for knowledge so that way everything stays fresh. There also exists a few special numbers that are so ubiquitous that they never cease to amaze us. The most famous of these is the number phi, which again, remember when I started from the beginning, the pronunciation is supposed to be F-E-E, which I would think that says phi. Could be Fe, but I definitely don't think that sounds like pi, which is the ratio of the circumference of any circle to its diameter. The value of pi, 3.14159 ... has fascinated many generations of mathematics. Even though it was defined originally in geometry, pi appears frequently and unexpectedly in the calculation of probabilities. And again, there's another book out here. I'm only reading for this one, which is The Golden Ratio of Phi. There's another book out here, The Ancient Secrets of the Flowers of Life. I don't know if you've ever seen this particular book. In this particular book, it does spend some time going into phi as well. And this book was written by an author by the name of Drunvalo Melchizedek. And that book also goes into it. Again, it's always good to reference multiple pieces of literature. You know, you never should necessarily just take one piece of literature as it is, that it is the gospel, so to speak. It should be able to be referenced in some way, shape, or form. So again, the value of phi, 3.14159 ... has fascinated many generations of mathematicians. Even though it was defined originally in geometry, phi appears very frequently and unexpectedly in calculations of probabilities. A famous example is known as Buffon's needle, or maybe it's Buffon's needle, I'm not sure, after the French mathematician Georges Louis Leclerc, Comte de Buffon, or Buffon, 1707 to 1788, who posed and solved this probability problem in 1777. Leclerc asked, suppose you have a large sheet of paper on the floor, ruled with parallel straight lines spaced by a fixed distance. A needle of length equal precisely to the spacing between the lines is thrown completely at random onto the paper. And if you can see the diagram on the particular screen, then you can understand exactly kind of what they're describing. What is the probability that the needle will land in such a way that it will intersect one of the lines? Again, looking at figure 1. Surprisingly, the answer turns out to be the number 2 divided by phi. Therefore, in principles, you can even evaluate phi by repeating this experiment many times and observing in what fraction of the total number of those you obtain an intersection. There exists, however, less tedious ways to find the value of phi. And that's what we're looking for. Working smarter, not harder. Phi has by now become such a household word that film director Darren Aronofsky was even inspired to make a 1999 electoral thriller with that title. Less than known, phi is another number, or pi is another number, phi. And I'm not sure which one of the pronunciations. Again, the pi may be pi and the phi, which is phi, so I'd have to get some more clarification on that, which is in many respects even more fascinating. Suppose I ask you, for example, what do the delightful petal arrangements in a rose petal, Salvador Dali's famous painting, Sacrament of the Last Supper, the magnificent spiral shells of mollusks, or the breeding of rabbits all have in common? Hard to believe that these very disparate examples do have in common a certain number or geometrical proportion known since antiquity. Antiquity, generally speaking, meaning since the beginning, back in the day, a number that in the 19th century was given the honorifics golden number, quote unquote, golden ratio, and quote unquote, golden section. So we're talking about the PHI, which is the phi, given a particular name, back in the 19th century, 3 of which it looks like it was referred to, whether it was golden number, golden ratio, or golden section. A book published in Italy at the beginning of the 6th century went so far as to call this ratio, quote unquote, divine proportion. In everyday life, we use the word proportion either for the comparative relation between parts of things with respect to the size or quality, or when we want to describe a harmonious relationship between different parts. In mathematics, the term proportion is used to describe an equality of the type 9 is to 3 as 6 is to 2. As we shall see, the golden ratio provides us with an intriguing mingling of the two definitions, in that while defined mathematically, it is claimed to have pleasing harmonious qualities. And again, we all should understand, or we should know, even though it doesn't necessarily seem like there's a connection. Proportions are important. I mean, we all cook, right? Or you've seen people cook, or you try to make something, or whether it's cake or whatever it might be. You got to have the 1/4 of this and 2 pinches of that and 1 tablespoon of that. If any of those proportions, change, then it's going to change the makeup and the dynamics of what you're trying to create. The first clear definition of what has later become known as the golden ratio was given around 300 BC by the founder of geometry as a formalized deductive system, Euclid of Alexandria. We shall return to Euclid and his fantastic accomplishments in chapter 4. But at the moment, let me note only that so great is the admiration that Euclid commands that in 1923, the poet Edna St. Vincent Millay wrote a poem entitled Euclid Alone Has Looked on Beauty Bare. Actually, even Millay's annotated notebook from her course in Euclidean geometry has been preserved. Euclid defined a proportion derived from a simple division of a line into what he called its quote-unquote extreme and mean ratio. In Euclid's words, a straight line is said to have been cut in extreme and mean ratio when, as the whole line is to the greater segment, so is the greater to the lesser. In other words, because I know I didn't understand that when I first read that, and maybe you did, but it didn't make sense when I first read it. In other words, if we look at figure 2, the line AB is certainly longer than the segment AC. At the same time, the segment AC is longer than CB. So we have figure 2 up here. I don't see figure 2 up here. I was looking for figure 2. Okay, so here we go. So when we look at figure 2, AB is certainly longer than the segment A to C. At the same time, the segment AC is longer than CB. Okay. If the ratio of length of AC to that of CB is the same as the ratio of AB to AC, then the line has been cut in extreme and mean ratio, or in a quote unquote golden ratio. Who could have guessed that this innocent looking line division, which Euclid defined for some purely geometrical purposes, would have consequences in topics ranging from leaf arrangements in botany to structures of galaxies containing billions of stars, and from mathematics to the arts. The golden ratio, therefore, provides us with a wonderful example of that feeling of utter amazement that the famous physicist Albert Einstein, 1879 to 1955, valued so much. In Einstein's own words, quote unquote, the fairest thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the fundamental motion which stands at the cradle of true art and science. He who knows it not can no longer wonder, no longer feel amazement. It is as good as dead, a snuffed out candle. As we shall see calculated in this book, the precise value of the golden ratio, the ratio of A to C, AC to CB in figure 2, is the never-ending, never-repeating number 1.6180339887 . And such never-ending numbers have intrigued humans since antiquity. One story has it that when the Greek mathematician Hippasus of Metapontum discovered in the 5th century BC that the golden ratio is a number that is neither a whole number, like the familiar 1, 2, 3, nor even a ratio of 2 whole numbers, like the fraction 1/2, 2/3, as rational numbers. This absolutely shocked the other followers of the famous mathematician Pythagoras, i.e. the Pythagoreans. The Pythagorean worldview, which will be described in chapter 2, was based on an extreme admiration of the arithmos, the intrinsic properties of the whole numbers of the ratios, and their presumed role in the cosmos. The realization that there exist numbers like the golden ratio that go on forever without displaying any repetition or pattern caused a true philosophical crisis. Legend even claims that, overwhelmed with this stupendous discovery, the Pythagoreans sacrificed 100 oxen in awe. Although this appears highly unlikely given the fact that the Pythagoreans were strict vegetarians. I should emphasize at this point that many of these stories are based on purely documented historical material. The precise date for the discovery of numbers that neither whole nor fractions known as irrational numbers is not known with any certainty. Nevertheless, some researchers do place the discovery in the 5th century BC, which is at least consistent with the dating of the stories just described. What is clear is that the Pythagoreans basically believed that the existence of such numbers was so horrific that it must represent some sort of cosmic error, one that should be suppressed and kept secret, right? And I think that's always interesting that sometimes when we're, receiving new information or we're hearing something that we don't know of or that we're not very versed on, is to sometimes it can seem just unbelievable, right? It's just like, oh, there's no way that can be, right? But I think the thing we have to also understand is there's just so much that we do not know. But yet the ego, and forgive me, I'm certainly not trying to attack anybody, the ego makes us think that there is so much that we do know, or that what we do know is so much that it sometimes doesn't allow us to have the level of humility that we need to understand that every day is an opportunity to learn. Every day is an opportunity to challenge what you think you know. So that way, if that makes sense. The fact that the golden ratio cannot be expressed as a fraction as a rational number means simply that the ratio of two lengths, which is A to C and C to B in figure 2, if you remember that figure we showed a little bit earlier, cannot be expressed as a fraction. In other words, no matter how hard we search, we cannot find some common measure that is contained, let's say 31 times in AC and 19 times in CB. Two such lengths that have no common measure are called incommensurable. The discovery that the golden ratio is an irrational number was therefore at the same time a discovery of incommensurability. On the Pythagorean Life, circa AD 300, the philosopher and historian Iamblichus, a descendant of the noble Syrian family, described the violent reaction to this discovery. They say that the first human to discover the nature of commensurability and incommensurability to those unworthy to share in the theory was so hated that not only was he banned from the Pythagoreans, I mean, he was kicked out of the group that he was before always welcome in, common association and way of life, but his tomb was built as if their former colleague was departed from life along mankind. Now that's cold piece of work. They was like, get up out here and we're gonna build a tomb for you because you definitely gonna end up there sometime soon. That's interesting. In other professional mathematics, in the professional mathematic literature, the common symbol for the golden ratio is the Greek letter tau, T, from the Greek top dot II, T-O-M-I, to-me, which means the cut or the section. However, at the beginning of the 20th century, the American mathematician Mark Barr gave the ratio a name of Phi, P-H-I, 4. The Greek letter of the name Phidias, the Greek sculptor who lived around 490 to 430 BC. Phidias' greatest achievements were the Athena Parthenos in Athens and the quote-unquote Zeus in the Temple of Olympia. He is traditionally always also credited with having been in charge of other Pythagorean sculptures, although it's quite probable that many were actually made by his students and assistants. Barr decided to honor the sculptor because a number of art historians maintain that Phidias had made frequent and meticulous use of the golden ratio in his culture. We shall examine similar claims very scrupulously in this book. Scrupulously, if I didn't say that right the first time. I will use the names golden ratio, golden section, golden number, phi, and also the symbol interchangeably throughout, because these are the names most frequently encountered in the recreational mathematics literature. Some of the greatest mathematical minds of all ages, the Pythagoreans, from Pythagoras to Euclid in ancient Greece, through the medieval Italian mathematician Leonardo of Pisa, and the Renaissance astronomer Johannes Kepler, to present-day scientific figures such as Oxford physicist Roger Penrose, have spent endless hours over the simple ratio and its properties. But the fascination with the golden ratio is not confined to mathematicians. Biologists, artists, musicians, historians, architects, psychologists, and even mystics have pondered and debated the basis of its ubiquity and appeal. In fact, it is probably fair to say that the golden ratio has inspired thinkers of all disciplines like no other number in the history of mathematics, which makes sense because, again, when there are things to be learned, we should all have, or there's always going to be a desire for someone to learn them. An immense amount of research, in particular by the Canadian mathematicians or author Roger Hurst Fischler, described in the excellent book, A Mathematical History of the Golden Number, has been devoted even just to the simple question of the origin of the name golden section. Given the enthusiasm that this ratio has generated since antiquity, we might have thought that the name also has ancient origins. Indeed, some authoritative books on the history of mathematics, like Francois Lesseur's The Birth of Mathematics in the Age of Plato, and Carl B. Boyer's A History of Mathematics, place the origin of this name in the 5th and 6th centuries respectively. This, however, appears not to be the case. As far as I can tell from reviewing much of the historical fact-finding effort, this term was first used by the German mathematician Martin Ohm, brother of the famous physicist George Simon Ohm, after whom Ohm's law in electromagnetism is named, in the 1835 second edition of his book, De Rein Elementar Mathematik, The Pure Elementary Mathematics. Ohm writes in a footnote, one also customarily calls the division of an arbitrary line in two such parts, the golden section. Ohm's language clearly leaves us with an impression that he did not invent the term itself, but rather used a commonly accepted name. Yet the fact that he did not use it in the first edition of his book, published in 1826, suggests at least that the name golden section, or in German, Goldenschnitt, gained its popularity around the 1830s. The name might have been used orally prior to that, perhaps in non-mathematical circles. There is no question, however, that following Ohm's book, the term golden section started to appear frequently and repeatedly, I might add, in the German mathematical and art history literature. It may have made its debut in English in an article by James Sully on aesthetics, which appeared in the ninth edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica in 1875. Sully refers to the quote-unquote interesting experimental inquiry instituted by Gustav Theodor Fechner, a physicist, and pioneering German psychologist in the 19th century, into the alleged superiority of the golden section as a visible proportion. I discuss Fechner's experiments in chapter 7. The earliest English uses in a mathematical context appear to have been in the article entitled, the quote-unquote, the golden section by B. Ackerman, that appeared in 1899 in the American Mathematical Monthly, and around the same time in 1898 book Introduction to Algebra by the well-known teacher and author G. Christow, 1851 to 1911. Just as a curiosity, let me note that the only definition of a quote-unquote golden number that appears in the 1900 edition of the French encyclopedia Nouveau Russe Illustre is a number used to indicate each of the years of the lunar cycle. This refers to the position of the calendar year within the 19-year cycle, after which the phases of the moons recur on the same dates. Clearly, the phrase took a long time to enter the French mathematical nomenclature. But what is the fuss about? What is it that makes this number or geometrical proportion so exciting as to deserve all this attention? The golden ratio's attractiveness stems first and foremost from the fact that has an almost uncanny way of popping up where it's least expected. Take, for example, an ordinary apple, the fruit often associated with, probably mistakenly, with a tree of knowledge that figures to be prominently in the biblical account of humankind's fall from grace, and cut it through its girth. You will find that the apple seeds are arranged in a 5-star pattern, or pentagon. Look at figure 3. Each of these isosceles triangles that makes the corners of a pentagram has the property that the ratio of the length is longer than let me go back. Each of the 5 isosceles triangles that make the corners of the pentagram has the property that the ratio of the length of its longer side to the shorter side, the implied base, is equal to the golden ratio, 1.618, ... But you may think, maybe this is not so surprising. After all, the golden ratio has been defined as a geometrical proportion. Perhaps we should not be too astonished to discover that this proportion is found in some geometrical shapes. So I kind of see what he's saying. This is, however, only the tip of the iceberg. According to Buddhist tradition, in one of Buddha's sermons, he did not utter a single word. He merely held a flower in front of his audience. What can a flower teach us? A rose, for example, is often taken as a symbol of natural symmetry, harmony, love, and fragility. In Religion of Man, Indian poet and philosopher Rabindranath Tagore, 1861 to 1941, writes, quote unquote, "Somehow we feel that through a rose, the language of love reach our heart," unquote. Suppose you want to quantify the symmetric appearance of a rose. Take a rose and dissect it to uncover the way in which its petals overlap the predecessors. As I described in chapter 5, you will find that the positions of the petals are arranged according to the mathematical rule that relies on the golden ratio. Turning now to the animal kingdom, we are all familiar that the strikingly beautiful spiral structures of many shells of mollusks such as chambered nautilus, Nautilus pompilus, figure 4. In fact, the dancing Shiva of the Hindu myths holds such a nautilus in one of the hands as a symbol of one of the instruments initiating creation. These shells also have inspired so many architectural constructions. American architect Frank Lloyd Wright, for example, based the design of the Guggenheim Museum in New York City on the structure of the chambered nautilus. Within the museum, the visitors ascend a spiral ramp, moving on when their imaginative capacity is saturated by the art they see. Just as the mollusk builds its spiritual chambers when fully occupying physical space. We shall discover in chapter 5 that the growth of the spiral shells also obeys a pattern that is governed by the golden ratio. This is figure 5 that they were just referencing about just a second ago. I'm sorry, they're going to reference about now. By now, we do not have to be number mysticists to begin to feel a certain way or a certain awe at the property of the golden ratio to show in what appear to be totally unrelated situations and phenomena. Furthermore, as I noted at the beginning of the chapter, the golden ratio can be found not only in natural phenomena, but also in a variety of human-made objects and works of art. For example, in Salvador Dali's painting from 1955, Sacrament of the Last Supper, in the National Gallery of Washington, D.C., which is the picture that's right above, the dimensions of the painting, approximately 1051 by 65 divided by 1, are in a golden ratio to each other. Perhaps even more important, part of the huge dodecahedron, a 12-face regular solid in which each side is a pentagon, is seen floating above the table and engulfing it. So can you guys see this big thing right here? What it's talking about? That's flowing above the gate. below the table engulfing it. As we shall see in chapter 4, regular solids like the cube that can be precisely enclosed by a sphere with all of their corners resting on the sphere, and the dodecahedron in particular, are intimately related to the golden ratio. Why did Dali choose to exhibit the golden ratio so prominently in his painting? His remark that the communion must be symmetrical only begins to answer the question. As I show in chapter 7, the golden ratio features, or at least claim to feature, in the works of many artists, architects, designers, and even in famous musical compositions. Broadly speaking, the golden ratio has been in some of these works to achieve what we might term, quote unquote, visual or audio effectiveness. One of the properties contributing to such effectiveness is proportion, the size relationships of parts to one another as to the whole. The history of art shows that the long search for an elusive canon of perfect proportion, one that would somehow automatically confer aesthetically pleasing qualities on all works of art, the golden ratio has proven to be the most enduring. But why? A closer example of the examples from nature and from arts reveal that they raise questions at 3 different levels of increasing depth. First, there are the immediate questions. Are all the appearances of Phi in nature and in the arts that are cited in literature real, or do some of those simply represent misconceptions and crankish interpretations? B, can we actually explain the appearance, if real, of Phi in these and other circumstances? Second, given that we define quote unquote beauty as, for in Webster's Unabridged Dictionary, quote unquote, the quality which makes an object seem pleasing or satisfying in a way, that raises the question: is there an aesthetic component to the mathematics? And if so, what is the essence of this component? This is a serious question because, as the American architect, mathematician, and engineer Richard Buckminster Fuller, 1895 to 1983, once put it, when I am working on a problem, I never think about the beauty. I think only of how to solve the problem. But when I am finished, if the solution is not beautiful, I know it is wrong. Finally, the most intriguing question is, what is it that makes mathematics so powerful and ubiquitous? What is the reason that mathematics and numerical constants like the golden ratio play such a central role in topics ranging from fundamental theories of the universe to the stock market? Does mathematics exist even independently of the humans who have discovered, invented it, and its principles? Is the universe by its very nature mathematical? The last question can be phrased using the famous aphorism of the British physicist Sir James Jeans, 1847 to 1946, as, is God a mathematician? The golden ratio. I will attempt to address all those questions in some detail in this book via the fascinating story of Phi. The sometimes tangled history of this ratio spans millennia as well as continents. Equally important, I hope to tell a good human interest story. A part of the story will be about the time when quote unquote scientists and quote unquote mathematicians were self-selected individuals who simply pursued questions that kindled their curiosity. These people often labored and died without knowing whether their works would change the course of scientific thought or would simply disappear without a trace. Before we embark on this main journey, however, we have to familiarize ourselves with numbers in general and with the golden ratio in particular. After all, how did the initial idea of the golden ratio arise? What was it that led Euclid to even bother to define such a line division? My aim is to help you glean some insights into the true roots of what we might call golden numberism. To this goal, we will now take a brief exploratory tour to the very dawn of mathematics. Islam. I appreciate you guys. Man, that was cool. I hope you got something out of that. I actually, I took a few different things out of that. Again, I think we don't realize how connected so many different things are. We just don't understand that we are here. Not by accident. We are here because everything was made beautifully. The Creator did everything that we needed him to do, so that way we would be able to experience life in the way we were supposed to experience it. The key is, are we willing to accept that? Are we willing to follow the path that has been laid before us? If we do, Sometimes life is a little bit easier. If we don't, maybe it's a little harder. So either way, man, I appreciate you guys for being here for the Friday Night Book Club with the BBT. You can always reach out to us anytime by sending us an email at burningbushtabernacle.ts@gmail.com. You can go to any of our websites where we've got merch, we've got books that you can buy. Again, we just want to be an example. And I know it's hard in today's world with so much noise about what a moor is, what being Moorish is, what the science is supposed to be. We're just trying to be an example that you ain't got to do a whole bunch of different type of stuff. It doesn't require you to uproot your life and try to be somebody that you're not. It just requires you to be more accountable and to appreciate life and the connectivity that we have to everything. So with that being the case, I'm going to go ahead and sign off here, say us a prayer, and again, thank you. We appreciate you guys. We hope you come back next Friday to be with us here at 6 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Allah, Father of the universe, Father of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. Allah is my protector, my God, and my salvation by night and by day. Through his holy prophet, Noble Ali, Shalom Aleichem, I, Hotep, Islam, peace, 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 peace.
I'm a spirit speaking, truth seeking, heart reaching, knowledge leaking, seeds sowing, harvest reaping, man of meager means. I have yet to leave, I'm still breathing. To quit, I have no reason. I mean, I'm asleep, but I be trying to live my dreams. I cannot even act if it's all easy. Either you gon' do it or you don't really. It ain't no in between. Baby, you can ask the sun, it's an everyday thing. Consistency in your routine is how you bring reality. Working like a slave, that's how I made this masterpiece. Living like a god, I lay at night